during Lent, I asked you to take some time with that gospel we heard that first Sunday of Lent, that Luke 6 passage where Jesus says to those whom he is preaching the kingdom of heaven to, pray for your enemies, pray for your persecutors, bless those who curse you, forgive those who hurt you. That was his invitation and his command to us, to all those who would follow him through time, and we continue to reflect on that. One of the things that I hear people say frequently in our Christian tradition is, Jesus Christ died for you. Jesus died for you. But what does that mean, really? That Jesus died for you, died for us? Did he know us? Did he have us in his mind when he went through this passion that we heard proclaimed for us today? I think Paul does us a favor in this letter that he wrote to the Christian community in Philippi in northern Greece in that first century when Christianity was trying to find its place in the world, when Christians were asking, what does it mean to follow this crucified Christ, this Messiah who was Jewish, who was murdered? What does it mean to follow him? He clarifies for us who this Christ is for us. Christ did die for us to send us a very clear message. And we get a sense of what Paul's understanding is about why Jesus died for us. Now, if you listened to the second part of that reading from Paul in Philippians 2, it is often reckoned by scholars as a poem. It's a hymn that the early Christians sang together, maybe even a creed that they would say together about who they believed Christ to be. And in this, we are told that Christ, the eternal God, the Christ who is the blueprint, the DNA of God, who has been poured out into all of creation from the very beginning for billions of years, taking on matter, filling it with the divine presence of God, chooses 2,000 years ago to empty himself. This hymn tells us he engaged kenosis, God emptying himself of anything divine that would give him advantage in this world. Why? So he could enter fully into the human experience. That made sense to me when I heard the Creedence Clearwater Revival song, Fortunate Son. If any of you remember back, and parents, you can introduce your children to the songs of CCR. This was actually a song that was being sung by CCR during the Vietnam era. And if you remember, there was a great dispute in the United States about who was getting sent to Vietnam. Who was it? It was the poor. It was the disadvantaged. It was the African Americans. It was the people from the South who had nothing to lose. It was not the sons of the senators and the congressmen. They had an advantage. And here they were, CCR singing, "It ain't me, it ain't me, I ain't no senator's son. It ain't me, I ain't no fortunate one." It was their cry out about the disadvantage, about the separation that they saw in the people who were being asked to give their lives for the virtues and values of this country. I think it's the same point Paul and this hymn was making in saying, Jesus lets go, Christ lets go of his advantage as God's Son to become fully one of us, taking on human form, a servant named Jesus, whose name means God saves. He became one like us to show us the mind of God, to show us what it means to live the love of God. This language is not about him paying a debt or ransoming people. This is not about purchasing forgiveness. This is God choosing out of love to empty himself to become like you and me so he could show us what it means to live in love. That mind of God. And Paul prefaces this hymn by saying, in your relationships with one another, Christian people, what makes you look any different in the world? It is because you put on the mind of God, shown to us by Christ in Jesus, who humbled himself, who became lowly, who put everyone else's need for wholeness before his own needs, who let go of his fear on the ground in Gethsemane, who let go of his desire for a life that maybe he dreamt about, so that the will of a loving God could be shown to the world in those words spoken from the cross, forgive them, Father, for they do not know what they are doing. He asks us, he implores us to put on the mind of humility in our relationships with one another. What did that look like in Jesus' life? The humiliation that he experienced on the cross, stripped naked before his countrymen, beaten, spit upon, mocked, betrayed, denied, cursed. He endured all of it so that love could be revealed in resurrection. And this wasn't something that he somehow magically knew because he was looking in a crystal ball. He didn't know what life beyond the grave was, but he trusted that God did. And he gave himself over to that promised new life. He humbled himself so that that life could be revealed. You and I, called to put on the mind of Christ with each other, to be humble, to give ourselves away. Does this still happen in the world? Do you see it? Have you seen it? Have you seen people put on the mind of Christ for the sake of the kingdom, for the sake of the world? Does Christ's mission continue to go on in Christians, in you and me? Does it happen? I don't see anybody nodding. It breaks my heart. Because do we see it? We wonder, don't we? Is the power of God still in the world around us today? You know, I was listening to NPR this week, and they were in Rwanda. Rwanda is commemorating the 25th anniversary of the genocide that occurred there in 1994. 800,000 people were murdered in 100 days. Mostly women and children. Tutsis, because they were of the other clan. This wasn't an army going around and killing people. This was neighbors, macheteing neighbors to death because they were told that they were cursed, that they were other than, that they were a threat. 25 years later, they are holding commemoration ceremonies to listen. And the question is, how has that country continued? Has that country healed from that atrocity, that genocide, that Holocaust? And they have. And the question becomes, how did they do that? We have survivors who hid away and watched their families murdered. 5 people left out of 50 witnesses to this atrocity, living next door today to the sons and daughters of the murderers, going to college with the sons and daughters of those who took their parents' lives. How are they existing side by side? When the international community got involved in Rwanda, what they asked is, how are we ever going to move forward? Can we put everybody on trial? Can we truly punish everybody? And they decided, no, punishment is not life. Punishment will further divide and polarize and disintegrate our country. And what they did is they set up local courts in the villages. They brought in people to convene local courts where those who were accused of the murders were sat in the middle of the courtyard in the city, and they were asked to tell the truth in detail. Because there's an African saying that the truth will set you free. It's not original to Africa, is it? But they still hold that truth. The truth will lead to healing. And what happened inside of that was these survivors had to listen to people describe in detail how they murdered their families. Their own trauma oftentimes reopened. And so these reporters that were in this NPR story were talking about interviews they were having with the survivors. How are you managing in the midst of this? And almost to a person, they heard, my pain is real. My heart still hurts. But what I know is that if this did not happen, the country would not be able to heal. I put my own need for vengeance aside in the name of forgiveness so that healing can happen. I endure the stories over and over again so that they can be freed of their guilt and their grief, so that we as a country can move forward together. It hurts, but it's what has to happen for life to emerge out of this death. People, do you see the Paschal mystery in this? Do you see the life of Jesus the Christ revealing for us the way to be in this world? Revealing the pattern of living and suffering and new life. Living and suffering a new life. This is the pattern you and I live in every day, over and over and over again. But do we trust the new life? That is what you and I are being invited to consider today. Why? Not for ourselves, but for the glory of God, who desires salvation for all creation, for all people, for the entire world to know the life God has put in them.